Hello, everyone who's already joined us. We'll be starting in about 3 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to get started at 7 o'clock. So welcome to the webinar From Awareness to Action, Advocating for IVF Availability and Access, hosted by Resolve, the National Infertility Association. I'm Simi Bokal, Senior Manager of Communications and Programs at Resolve. Tonight, our goal is to motivate you to take action by understanding key issues impacting access to care, specifically in vitro fertilization IVF. It's often necessary for those facing infertility. Amidst broader discussions on reproductive access and rights, we'll focus on actionable steps to enhance IVF accessibility. In a climate where family building and IVF make headlines, we aim to cut through the noise and highlight what availability and access to care truly mean. As a longstanding and leading patient advocacy organization established in 1974, Resolve supports millions of Americans facing infertility and family building challenges. We empower individuals through knowledge, foster a supportive community, unite voices in advocacy, and inspire action. By amplifying patient voices to lawmakers, we ensure that stories of hope and perseverance are brought to the forefront. In addition to advocacy, Resolve offers a supportive community where individuals can connect with others facing similar challenges related to infertility and family building. Tonight, you'll have the opportunity to hear from leaders who tirelessly advocate for the 1 in 6 people seeking to realize their dreams of starting or growing their family. Additionally, we'll hear from 2 individuals whose family building journeys were unexpectedly propelled into the spotlight due to a recent court ruling in Alabama. Whether you're new to advocacy or a seasoned advocate, we hope tonight's discussion will inspire you to take action or continue your efforts in advocating for change. For the professionals joining us who serve patients daily, your involvement is invaluable. By engaging in advocacy, you champion the interests of your patients, advocating for policies that address their needs and support your ability to provide safe and effective medically necessary care. Following the presentation, we'll address audience questions. Please use the Q&A feature or email us at info@resolve.org to ask your questions. Together, let's amplify the voices of those impacted by infertility and work towards policies supporting their journey to building families. And let's embark on this advocacy journey together. So let's dive into the challenges facing IVF, explore some current IVF practices. We'll hear from the patient perspective of, again, the individuals impacted in Alabama, and discuss Resolve and ASRM's virtual Federal Advocacy Day on May 14th, and we'll conclude with a Q&A session. Our moderator, Joe Cody, will lead this discussion with Resolve's president and CEO, Barbara Calora. Since 2018, Joe Cody has passionately advocated for reproductive rights and family building options. He served on various Resolve committees and held leadership positions, including co-chairing Resolve's 2020 and 2021 Federal Advocacy Day. As an IVF dad, his personal experiences drive his dedication to increasing access to assisted reproductive technologies. A background in health policy and government relations adds depth to his advocacy efforts, shaping a future of equal access to family building options for all. And serving as president and CEO of Resolve since 2007, Barbara is a nationally recognized expert on infertility and the family building journey, with a special emphasis on advocacy, public policy, and access to care. Barbara has worked with the World Health Organization on infertility definitions and clinical guidelines. She's worked with ACOG on their clinical definitions for infertility and served a 4-year term on the Advisory Council of the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development and NIH. Barb's expertise is widely recognized with appearances on major media platforms. Her dedication to Resolve stems from her personal experience with infertility. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Emmy. Barb, it's great to see you this evening. How are you doing?
Great to be here. Okay, wait a minute here. I have the 1 in 6, probably wearing the 1 in 6 shirt. And if I see correctly, maybe, oh, right. Okay, you did a little editing.
I realized that I have to update my wardrobe this evening, so everyone can go to the Resolve website to buy some new swag before Advocacy Day in May, and I'll be doing that this evening to update because, as we know, the numbers have been updated from 1 in 8 to 1 in 6, and it just shows how important this issue is and how many people are impacted by it, not only in the US, but globally, and that's why we're here tonight. So, again, thanks so much for joining us and to all of our speakers. And a lot has been in the news over the last several months in this space. We've seen incredible amounts of action. And one of the things that we hear a lot is this term called personhood. So we're hearing a lot about personhood, what it is, especially since Alabama had the Supreme Court ruling. But just to ensure everyone's on the same page, can you give us a definition of what the concept of personhood is?
Well, Joe, it's a thing. It's a belief. It's a movement. It's a description, it's a lot of things, but at its core, personhood is where you are defining what is a person. Now, that seems a little odd that we need to have a movement or a new word called personhood, but what this really is about is when life begins. So the personhood conversation started many, many, many years ago. In fact, we saw the first personhood ballot initiative. In other words, this was an attempt to change a state constitution to define when life begins. And this was back in 2008 in the state of Colorado. And so that's going back a long ways. Resolve was very involved in that. But what it is when does life begin? And what do we call a person? And the personhood movement is saying that at the very, very beginning of a sperm and an egg coming together, that is a person. So when you're thinking about when life begins and you're thinking about how people build their families and how people have men and women get together to, in an unassisted way, to reproduce, sperm and egg come together. The personhood movement is actually saying that fertilized egg is a person. So for people in our community, we know that that's exactly what happens in the IVF lab, that a sperm and an egg are put together in a petri dish. That's why we call it in vitro fertilization. And the personhood movement is saying that fertilized egg in that petri dish is a person.
Well, thanks for that. It's really great to level set and have a better understanding of what this is. And, after the Alabama ruling, we really saw a drastic impact on IVF almost immediately across the state of Alabama. And we're going to hear about some of those stories from people who are directly impacted a little later this evening. And then, although the state eventually passed legislation that granted immunity to clinicians and patients that would allow access, can you explain a little bit why this concept of personhood poses such a threat to the access to IVF treatment?
Well, if you are declaring that fertilized egg in that petri dish is a person, then all of a sudden you have to take kind of a pause and look at everything that happens in that IVF laboratory and say to yourself, can we do this to a person? Can we do that to a person? And Joe, I just want to mention here that the embryo, that fertilized egg, is microscopic. You and I can't see it. We need a microscope to see it. So keep that in mind. We're talking about cells that you only can see under a microscope. And we are now declaring that is a person. Now, you're going to hear about this, but a very common practice in the IVF process is what's called cryopreservation or freezing of embryos. You might ask yourself, well, gosh, if that's a person, would we be able to freeze that embryo? Because that's really saying, can we freeze a person? I think the answer is no. And so any kind of potential harm that might come to that embryo could be seen as some kind of harm to a person. Now, what kind of harm would that be? Well, that could be the freezing. It could be something else that's done in the laboratory. So all of this sudden, we start looking at this process and we start saying to ourselves, gee, can we do everything that we normally do in the IVF process if now that fertilized egg is a person? And so this is where we get a lot of the problems. And one of the things that I would say to you is that we look at all of these bills that are introduced and we look at the language of all of these bills and we try and determine, are they saying a fertilized egg is a person? Are they defining when life begins? Are they saying it's at the moment of conception, which is a term that we often see in legislation? And Joe, that's when we get concerned. That's when we get more engaged and we get more involved. And I just want to say too that the way that IVF is practiced today, it's so highly personalized. In fact, if you are someone who has this personhood belief and you need IVF, you may choose to not do IVF. You may choose to do IVF. And the good news is you can probably go to any single IVF clinic in the United States and you can tell them how you view those embryos, and you can tell them how you would like to treat those embryos and how you would like that IVF process to work for you. And Joe, I am 100% confident that you will get that care. In other words, if you are of the belief that those embryos are people and you want to approach that IVF process in a different way, You can. You absolutely can. But for the majority of us, we want the standard of care. We want to be treated and receive the highest possible care that we can for our best chance at having a baby. And so that is where this personhood belief comes sort of in and knocks heads with the IVF process, and why you saw clinics in Alabama say, gee, if this embryo is a person, we have got problems and we are going to pause treating people in the state. I don't want to say there's problems with the IVF process. It's the belief that that embryo is a person is making that IVF process one that embryologists, physicians, nurses are really uncomfortable being able to perform.
So it sounds like there's a lot of uncertainty around this, around the concept of personhood, what it presents, what it actually leads to in the practice of IVF. And as we look to the, future of these personhood efforts, how is Resolve and others actively working to ensure that IVF is protected?
Well, it's a great question, and we feel that there is a need to protect not only the healthcare workers who deliver that care, but the patients who want to access that care. And so we have a federal bill that's been introduced in the House and the Senate. It's an issue and a bill that we will be advocating for on our Advocacy Day coming up in May. And we need to get that federal protection bill passed. It's a really solid bill, Joe. It's one that is going to protect both, like I said, the healthcare workers and people accessing it. The nice thing about this bill is it doesn't require anybody to do IVF. It doesn't force any doctor to do IVF. It's just saying, if you choose to do this, if you choose to be in this field of medicine, you're going to be protected, and you'll be able to get that care. So we want that to pass that federal legislation. And then if we see states try and pass any kind of personhood legislation, we will be calling all the advocates in that state, just like we did in Alabama, to raise their voices, to tell their stories. We'll be there with the science and with the data and doing our best to convince those lawmakers to really be careful on how they proceed forward with legislation.
Yeah, I think the action that we saw after Alabama is really just the tip of the iceberg. And there's so many passionate advocates who are willing to make their voice heard. And that's what Resolve is so great for. And, as we talk a little bit about how IVF is practiced and that personalization that entails. So I wanted to have Simi introduce our next speaker so we can dig a little deeper into the practice of IVF. And we can have one of the leading medical experts be able to provide a little more context.
We now welcome Dr. Leonderis to join the discussion with Joe and Barbara. Dr. L, as he has given me the permission to call him, is a board-certified OBGYN and reproductive endocrinologist. He is the founder, medical director at Fertility and Gay Parents to Be, actively involved in advocacy and diversity initiatives, and contributes to Resolve's Physicians Council. He is the author of Building Your Family, The Complete Guide to Donor Conception, a board member of the Nest Foundation, a member of ASRM's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force, and past president of ASRM's LGBTQ Special Interest Group. Dr. L passionately advocates for improving access to reproductive health care, drawing from both professional expertise and his personal experiences trying to build his family. Thank you, Dr. L, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and it's just really a pleasure to be here with all of you.
Hey, Dr. L, thanks for joining us. It's really great to have you on. And, one of the things we wanted to talk about is unless someone's gone to medical school or they've trained as an RE or they've gone through IVF, there's a lot of confusion about how IVF is actually practiced. So can you tell a little bit about the high-level overview of the steps of IVF, some of that personalization that Barb talked about, but also the complexity and the science that goes behind this amazing technology?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm almost 30 years into this now, and I cannot tell you how much the field has changed and developed over the past 30 years, to the point now that we actually can really get to sometimes a root cause of infertility and work forward and help somebody build their family. Infertility is a disease. It's like cancer and diabetes. And the process of in vitro fertilization really requires, respecting somebody's bodily autonomy, respecting how they want to build their family, and personalizing it to what they need. So I think we always have to remember that nobody really wants to go see the fertility doctor to have their baby, but we want to have a family. And, the desire to have a family is independent of, gender, sexual identity, and it's kind of ubiquitous to almost our humanity. So when somebody takes that step to walk into the fertility clinic, they are kind of putting their heart and their hands in the team. And I think it's really important for everybody to understand it's not the doctor, it's the doctors, the nurses, the embryologists, everybody who's working hard for this success. And really, IVF has 4 major features. Understand who the patient is and what they need and how they walked in your door. And that might be that they have blocked tubes. That might be that they don't ovulate. Or here we have 2 men talking about in vitro fertilization. 40% of fertility challenges are male factor, right? It might be somebody who's single or somebody who identifies as LGBTQ+. I think many of you know I'm an LGBTQ+ advocate, and that's how my family came to life. But for me, the rainbow flag just means everybody is welcome to use the tools that have been developed over the past, 40 years to build their family. So the IVF process really starts with that investigation, identifying what that patient or couple may need. And then most people are not aware that humans are not that fertile. We ovulate 1 egg per month, and we're actually not so good at it, right? As far as getting pregnant. And then that being said, the IVF process involves medications that have been studied for over 40 years now that are safe in regards to risk. And we can drill down on that at a different discussion. Over a period of about 15 days, the person going through this stimulation endures actually shots, discomfort, emotional roller coaster in hopes of having multiple follicles grow. Because 1 egg at a time is not actually a really efficient way to utilize the science in the laboratory. So what we want to retrieve is 4, 10, maybe even 15 eggs if we can get there. So ovarian hyperstimulation, and then there's a procedure called an egg retrieval. This just happened to be my weekend working, so I did egg retrievals this weekend, and there were people who were coming in who this was their first try, and people who are coming in and this is their 4th try. It does not work every time, and that's why we need multiple attempts and lots of support to get people through this. That egg retrieval procedure involves anesthesia to provide comfort, a procedure where we go into the ovary very delicately with a needle to take out fluid in hopes that the embryologist behind the scenes finds the egg from each follicle. And I think we have to really understand that this is a Nobel Prize winning technology that's resulted in 8 million, 9 million people walking the earth. But it's that behind the scenes, those high-tech dream makers in the embryology lab that are doing that science. And it is science, and it's gotten so much better. I mean, understand that the live birth rates in the United States are considered the highest of anywhere worldwide. So we're retrieving those eggs, putting chosen sperm and egg together, sometimes manually fertilizing it, sometimes just letting the sperm kind of do their thing. And we close that incubator door. And the next day, the embryologist opens the incubator door, and we're all waiting for this result. How many eggs fertilized? So if we got 10 eggs, we'll be happy to have 8 that fertilize, but sometimes it's 7, sometimes it's only 6. And then from there, the embryos now go back into the incubator, and they're looked at 3, 5, 6, 7 days later to look for that ball of cells that Barb was talking about that has the potential to be successful. And that little ball of cells is then either transferred into a uterus in that cycle, or sometimes the embryos are tested. They're tested for chromosomal or genetic disorders, or simply cryopreserved because that person is not ready. Their uterus isn't ready to receive the embryo yet. embryo transfer happens, and then it's the longest 10 days of anybody's life waiting for that pregnancy test. And regularly we get questions, can I test early and so on? And I usually just kind of recommend waiting. And that pregnancy sets off a series of tests, then sets off another series of hurdles to get over. Pregnancy test, is the pregnancy in the uterus, and is it a viable pregnancy? And does that person who really wants to have a child get out of the first trimester? So it is a multi-step process with many professionals in it, and everybody really is doing their best to help people have healthy families.
It's really great to hear you talk about it like that, because I know when we went through it, having these conversations with the medical professionals who were helping us achieve our dream of having a child was amazing. And one of the things that really struck me was the ethical considerations and the personalization that really does come throughout this process. And, I recently was listening to a Senate hearing where they kept on referring to IVF treatment as the Wild West. And that's something that people love to say, especially when they don't necessarily understand the process. So can you give us a little insights into these practices and how ASRM and others are working to protect the integrity and the science and the practice of IVF?
Yeah, I will pretty much assure you that people who work at IVF clinics are not gunslingers, right? We are really practicing precise medicine, personalizing medicine, and really working hard to follow our guidelines and practice committee opinions that have been developed over years by many professionals over almost generations. I mean, recognize the American Society for Reproductive Medicine has 8,000 members worldwide. The American Urology Association has 23,000 members worldwide. Doctors are licensed, nurses are licensed, embryologists have a rigorous series of steps to get through to even just touch an egg and help an embryo form. But on the other side, my own clinic in the past year has been inspected by the Food and Drug Administration, the federal government, has been inspected by the state of Connecticut. Regularly, organizations like the American Pathologists and another organization called CLIA are inspected. Our entire healthcare facility is in fact inspected by organizations. So we are always being inspected and making sure we're staying kind of in the lane of excellent patient care, excellent laboratory practices to provide the patients the sense of security that in this scenario where they want to have a baby, that everything is done to ensure their success, and really importantly, that their wishes are executed, and that it's always the right sperm source and the right egg source. That chain of custody is so essential to this. And I think that when I hear that Wild West comment, it drives home to me that a lack of understanding of the, so many man hours of work to really, get an IVF clinic running and keep it going and to be successful. I mean, people are putting their hopes and dreams in the hands of this care team, and we struggle on that fertility roller coaster as well, positives and negatives and so on. So this is a very ethical practice. I mean, if I can be so direct to say, the most recent report has like 2.5% of children in the United States born via in vitro fertilization. And, that's now a growing number. And I think it's important to understand that over, let's say, the past, 10 years, pregnancy rates have increased by multiples. And as part of the push by American Society of Reproductive Medicine, Resolve, patient organizations, doctors, nurses, and so on, we've grown better embryos and now transfer fewer embryos, in that we've brought the risk or the likelihood of a triplet or a twin pregnancy down well less than 5%. Because what we've learned now over the past 40 years of this art, assisted reproductive technologies, is that the healthiest pregnancies are actually single-load pregnancies one child at a time. And that's the way humans are designed. So we're all really committed to healthcare and successful pregnancies.
Well, I really appreciate that perspective. I know when we were going through IVF, there was a lot that we did not know as we went through, and we learned stuff every single cycle we went through. And I think, like you said, raising awareness is incredibly important. And Barb, one of the things that you and we know, unfortunately, is the impact that this can have on the patient. And I can't imagine people who are going through it now having to also worry about access being cut off because of issues that are happening outside of their control. It's hard enough already. So, I know we're running a little late, but quickly, can you just provide a little bit about what people are dealing with and what things Resolve and ASRM are actively advocating on that can help people as they go through this really hard process?
Joe, there's a mountain of research that talks about the emotional impact of infertility and the impact that it has on your mental health. It is as impactful as a cancer diagnosis. So a person going through the infertility journey and accessing IVF is going through an incredible emotional, mental health impact. The title of this talk tonight is Advocating for IVF Availability and Access. The last word on there is about insurance coverage and access. That is laser focused by Resolve and ASRM to get more people insurance coverage. Why? Because people tell us every day, Joe, it's the number one reason why they can't see Dr. Leonderis. It's the number one reason preventing them from building their family is if their great employee benefits have left out IVF. So we advocate at the federal level, we advocate at the state level, we advocate with employers. We do everything we can to get people the most comprehensive benefits for this care. If they don't ever need it, thank goodness. But if they do, then the financial burden, that out-of-pocket costs goes way, way, way down, and that burden and barrier is eliminated. So let's do everything we can because it's already such an impactful journey, and eliminating that financial burden is something we would love to do.
Great. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Dr. L. Now I'm looking forward to continuing our discussion with some special guests. I'm thrilled to introduce our moderator, Elizabeth Carr. As the first in vitro baby born in the United States in 1981, Elizabeth offers a unique perspective on navigating infertility, and breaking down stigmas. With her extensive background as a seasoned journalist, podcast host, event MC, on-air expert, and keynote speaker, Elizabeth brings a wealth of experience and insight to our conversation. Joining her are Corinne O'Brien and Jamie Hurd. Their journeys collided with the Alabama Supreme Court's ruling on February 16th, declaring embryos created through IVF as children. This ruling prompted several IVF clinics in the state to pause their services, sparking concern among patients and professionals. Corinne took action by joining forces with Resolve to establish the Fight for Alabama Families Coalition, leading to an advocacy day in Montgomery, Alabama, where hundreds of patients and professionals from across the state and beyond united to address this pressing issue. Their efforts resulted in the Alabama governor signing a bill protecting IVF in clinics and patients from criminal and civil prosecution as part of the IVF process. Meanwhile, on March 7, 2024, during the State of the Union address, President Biden called for federal protections for IVF, shedding light on the urgency of the situation. Further amplifying the conversation, when Jamie Hurd realized her dream of building a family through IVF was in jeopardy after the Alabama ruling, she knew she had to speak out. On March 20th, 2024, despite lacking prior advocacy experience, Jamie testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on reproductive rights. Her testimony shed light on the far-reaching impacts of the ruling of healthcare, particularly in the realm of reproductive technology. Today, we get to hear from Corinne and Jamie, whose advocacy efforts inspire us all. Thank you, Elizabeth, for leading this discussion.
Thanks for having me, Simi. It's great to see you all here tonight. Just really quickly, 42 years ago, many of you may not realize my parents were in Massachusetts, and they had to fly down all the way to Virginia to access IVF because it was not available in Massachusetts. So now fast forward to think about all of a sudden something that has been around access, to these locations, and having clinics in almost every state in the country, to all of a sudden have IVF be put on pause for basically 2 weeks was just completely unthinkable to me. So I am so honored to have Jamie Hurd and Corinne here with me tonight. I won't take up any time because you all know who I am, and I'm so excited to talk to Jamie. We'll start with you, if you don't mind. Jamie, can you just share with us your personal experience with IVF and how the Alabama Supreme Court ruling affected your personal journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to be here with you guys. So with IVF, we started our journey back in 2019. And I won't get into too much of these specifics, but we did have a successful IVF round in 2022, and we have a beautiful son through that. And we decided to expand our family, and we had our first appointment February 14th, Valentine's Day of this year, and literally a few days later, the Alabama Supreme Court ruling happened, and it was definitely surprising. It was scary. We felt like our family was being attacked. And I think that's what gave us the power to go to Montgomery to advocate, just to make sure that we can share our story and do what we can to hopefully impact change. And luckily, we were able to get that bill passed with the governor. But it absolutely, gave us the urgency to, get up and get out in front and do what we need to do to make sure that we can get some protection for it.
Yeah, and just to go back to that feeling like it was a personal attack, I 100% relate to that because as somebody who got here through this technology, that's how I felt. But I want to focus on something that you and I have talked about before that I thought was so interesting. You were just trying to build your family, and all of a sudden to not have access to it, you had never advocated before. Can you talk a little bit about just having that desire to feel like, okay, I need to do something?
Absolutely. Before now, I still don't know who this person is. I mentioned that to Barb, like, I have no idea who this person is. I'm generally that person that's behind the scenes, definitely try to stay away from the front. But once we realize, like, oh my God, what if we are not able to have another baby because of this ruling? It definitely, like I mentioned, gave us the urgency to get out in front and advocate for ourselves. It was scary. It was absolutely scary. It was new territory. And even now, I still don't know what I'm doing. I'm just taking it day by day, but doing a lot of research, staying up to date as much as I can. But it definitely is a bit exciting to now that I have found this community with resolve and feeling seen and feeling heard with so many others that are experiencing the same things, and hoping that others can see the strength that I'm conjuring up somehow to get out and advocate. So that's where I am today.
I think it's just amazing. And, I'd love to hear you describe, how did you prepare for speaking in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee? I mean, that is something that, to share your very personal story with so many people and eyeballs on you, how did you go about getting ready for that?
The funny thing is, I hate public speaking, hate it. And leading up to the hearing, I was absolutely anxious. I was nervous again because this is new territory for me and something I have never, ever done a day in my life before. Even with my full-time job with my employer, certain things I stayed away from because I hated speaking in front of people. So I was definitely anxious leading up to it. But to be honest with you, once I got there and I started and I started to hear them speak, it all of my nerves left. And simply because as they're speaking and they're giving their opinion, I'm realizing they have no clue about what IVF is, what the journey looks like, what the process entails. And it just further highlighted the fact that we need to bring awareness and education to what the IVF process is, why is it important, what is infertility, and how it impacts so many, the 1 in 6 that we keep talking about. So again, once they started talking, all those nerves left. And so now I'm just using that power because I see how uneducated a lot of people are about this process.
Absolutely. And I just want to say personally, I think it's so brave of you to just summon up that courage, and something I think we all can be in awe of. And moving forward, what are some things that you're doing to continue to stay involved as we all keep an eye on everything, not just in Alabama, but also on a national level?
Absolutely. So some of the things that I've been doing, I have been making sure to kind of just stay in the know of everything that's going on across the nation. I follow a lot what Resolve is doing. I found some other communities that are also advocating for IVF. So I'm making sure to kind of just keep research and keep awareness. But a part of that too is I've also started a support group for Alabama through Resolve. So that was one of the biggest things that was an eye-opening as well, that is so many women that suffer silently with infertility and going through this process. And I'm hoping that I can use my voice and my story and my experience to help give strength to others that are going through this process, to let them know that you don't have to suffer through it alone. We have an amazing community that you can be a part of. So that's another thing that I'm doing as well to kind of help continue advocating for this.
Well, on behalf of all of us, I just want to say thank you so much for all you've done to this point and continue to do. I'm going to bring in Corinne O'Brien now, who is another fertility warrior just right down the road from you, essentially. Corinne, can you talk about how the Alabama ruling affected you and your journey, and share with us a little bit of your story?
Absolutely. And before I start, though, I just want to say to anyone who has not seen Jamie's speech, you need to go watch it. I watched it with tears in my eyes. It was beautiful and it was so brave, and you did a phenomenal job, Jamie. So I just wanted to start by saying that if you haven't seen it, you need to go watch it because it was so good. Yeah. So my name is Corinne O'Brien. My journey essentially with infertility began, I guess I could say, like almost 5 years ago. So 5 years ago, I was actually pregnant with my first child, not through IVF or any sort of assisted reproductive, but I lost my mother to pancreatic cancer. And so I was 6 months pregnant when I lost my mother. And at that point, I was an only child. And so my mother and I were so close, and navigating such a significant loss by myself without siblings. My husband and I realized, like, okay, we have this wonderful child coming into our life, but we know for sure that we want this child to have a sibling. And so we had our beautiful daughter, Louise, and, at the right time, we began trying again. And that was about 3.5 years ago. And since then, just ran into every hurdle you could run into. And fast forward, began working with the incredible team at Alabama Fertility about 2 years ago, and had our first IVF, tried everything you could possibly try right before IVF, and then had our first IVF cycle in October, retrieved 10 eggs, had a successful transfer in January, exactly like almost a month to the day before the Supreme Court decision. And maybe give or take, but fast forward that Friday, that news came down. That morning was our first 6-week scan. And, I was finally pregnant, and, we'd been waiting so long for news like that. And we were so excited to see our baby on the ultrasound. And we get to the ultrasound, and essentially the doctors say that, the heartbeat was slow, and, like, we're not out of the woods yet. This might not be a viable pregnancy, just like prepare your heart. And then that later that evening, received the news that that this was happening. And so, needless to say, is, you've already heard from Jamie, like that week, those days right after, we didn't really sleep much. It was pretty devastating to know that, even though I was pregnant, that this might not be successful. And then also we might not have access to IVF. And then, over that next kind of couple of days, UAB, which is one of the biggest hospitals here, stopped their services. Alabama Fertility paused on Wednesday. And I, for my full-time job, work as an education advocate in the State House. So I work in Montgomery. And I remember sitting at my desk, I had just come back from the State House and I got that news and I just lost it. And that next, that next morning, it was that Thursday morning, I essentially, after feeling pretty hopeless for a couple of days, woke up that next morning almost with like a divine intervention in a way. Just this like feeling like, okay, enough of feeling hopeless. Like we've got to get to work. Like the opposition, we know, is organized. So, no one is going to do this for us. Like like I know that legislators need to hear from their supporters. The very least we can do is throw an email in a Google Doc and send it to friends and just see what happens. Like let's just start small. And so that Thursday, sent it out to maybe 40 or 50 friends and colleagues around the state. And essentially by the end of that day, we were getting reports from folks receiving that document from people around the country, and also reports from the Speaker of the House, that the Speaker of the House was receiving emails every 2 minutes from folks like around the country. And so by that, we continued to work just to get people emailing and posting, and kind of the next day realized that bills would be filed that following Tuesday, and that would mean they'd be in committee on Wednesday. And so we needed to have advocates, patients, doctors, we needed everybody at the State House that Wednesday. And so that Sunday was introduced to Barb. And, the rest is history. The campaign, we had over 350 patients and advocates come to our State House. We sent over 33,000 emails that were counted, many, many more that weren't. And we just packed the State Houses in ways that it was just like, I know we've talked about this, the power of the numbers, like literally we were everywhere. You couldn't miss us. And because of that, we were able to pass the bill that we passed in 5 days, which is the shortest amount of time you can pass a bill in the state of Alabama. So we were heard loud and clear.
I just want to take a minute so everybody can digest that. To go from getting the news that you got and then organizing so quickly is just incredible. Just very quickly, what were some of the things going through your mind as you were preparing to speak alongside those families showing up, at the State House? What was that like for you?
Yeah. Well, I knew, and I know we've talked about this, Elizabeth, it's not just about the talking points. Legislators and just everyone needs to hear your story. Like the personal stories are what make it real and are what stick with people. And so that I just knew, like I had to practice my story, right, with so many, right, so to the point where I wouldn't cry every time I gave it. But those are the sort of things that we were thinking of, and that they needed to hear our stories, and that was the magic of that day.
And I think our next section of speakers will help tell that story as well. Thank you so much, Corinne. Just wanted to transition here now. In light of sharing those stories, we do have Federal Advocacy Day coming up that will help amplify the message. So I turn it over to Aisha.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Aisha, let me just introduce you really quickly so everyone has a little bit of background on you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, Corinne, Jamie. It was a very inspiring discussion. So I'm going to let Aisha dive into the action part, and so you can learn how you can get involved and become an advocate. Joining us, of course, is Aisha Resolve's Grassroots Advocacy Manager, and Aisha oversees the aspects of Resolve's government affairs program and engages with advocates to promote positive family building policy and counter any anti-family legislation. Thank you, Aisha.
Thank you, Simi. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. So just to jump on and talk a little bit about Federal Advocacy Day. So this year it will be May 14th. It's a Tuesday. It will be completely virtual as we've done it last year. It's just very convenient for people. Just three very important things for Federal Advocacy Day. Well, even before that, if you have not registered and you've participated before, please register. If this is the first time that you're considering doing Advocacy Day, I have a couple of things to go over that might allay any fears that you have. First, you will be assigned a state captain. These are volunteers that have been trained. They will host trainings with you and everyone from your state, your delegation. They will review everything with you. They'll talk to you about how to make your pitch, answer any questions you have. And then second, most importantly, you will never ever go into a meeting alone. So you'll either go into meetings with people from your state, so your delegation, or if you happen to be someone that's the only person registered from your state captain will be in those meetings with you. So you'll never ever be alone. And the last important thing is that if you still are a little anxious about what it actually looks like to go in and tell your story, if you go on our website, and we have it at the bottom here, resolve.org/advocacy day. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see we have a whole host of videos of different people sharing their pitch from different perspectives. We have providers, we have people from the military and veterans community, patients, just a variety of different voices so you can see what it might look like to actually go in and share your story. And the most important aspect of all of this is that you can share as much as you want to share or as little as you want to share. We'll have a script, a talking script with a list of our talking points, the bills we're advocating for. So if you're not completely comfortable with sharing your story, there are some other talking points that you can be assigned by your state captain, or you could even be a note taker, just if you want to see what it actually looks like to go into the meeting. But again, this is just a great opportunity for you to talk to your lawmaker and share your story. The second important aspect about Advocacy Day is this bipartisanship. So we really want lawmakers from just all the different parties, the two parties, to support IVF, to not only protect IVF from any threats, but also to support bills that will provide coverage for IVF. We have a lot of other bills that we advocate for on Advocacy Day. So again, we want support for all of those bills from both sides. So again, this is a bipartisan event. And lastly, why do you need to sign up for Advocacy Day? Again, this is just the best opportunity for you to share your story. I've gone to several state advocacy events at this point. We did Federal Advocacy Day last year. That was my first year, and really the stories of advocates is what makes a huge difference. All of us can go in and talk about the facts, about why they should provide coverage for IVF, why IVF should be protected, but it's your story that makes a huge impact. And so this is just your opportunity to go in and share, and honestly to meet other people in your community from your state across the nation. And it's a great opportunity to feel that sense of community. And for providers as well, it's a really great chance for you to share that perspective of someone who is seeing patients come in and day out, and they don't have access to care. And it's really important for legislators to hear this perspective as well. So again, when you combine these two different aspects, it's just really moving, and it can make a huge difference in what we're advocating for. And in terms of good news, this year we have over 830 people registered, which is amazing. Last year, if any of you participated, you know that we had about 460 people registered. So This year, we have almost double the number of people. Advocacy Day registration does close at the end of this month on the 30th. So again, if you have not registered yet, please make sure you register. And then I have a list of states where we still need advocates from. I'm going to read the list right now. So we still need people from Alaska, Arkansas, Delaware, Hawaii, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Montana, North Dakota, New Hampshire, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Oregon, South Dakota, West Virginia, and Wyoming. And we also need some state captains from different states. If you're interested in that, you can just shoot us an email and I can let you know what states are still missing. But thank you again for joining us and just letting me talk a little bit about Federal Advocacy Day. And I definitely hope you register and join us this year.
Thank you so much, Aisha. All right, so we'd love to address some questions from the audience. Again, if you have any questions, please pop them into the Q&A feature. If we don't get to your question, please email info@resolve.org. Right. Okay, we do have couple questions here. All right, first question. What worked best in convincing lawmakers to support laws? What works best in convincing lawmakers to support laws protecting fertility treatment and reproductive rights? I think Aisha just answered that with, I think, sharing your personal story. And you don't have to be an expert. I think that's a misconception. A lot of people think, oh, I have to know all the issues. I have to know everything. That's really not the case. Your story is really the most impactful thing that legislators want to hear. Let's see.
Can I just add to that, Simi, that, years of people advocating against personhood bills and advocating for keeping IVF legal and available, 9 times out of 10, those legislators know nothing about IVF. You heard Dr. Leonderis, you've heard all of us talking about it. They don't know what goes on in an IVF clinic. I mean, state lawmakers are not experts in everything under the sun. And so that is why you walk in and you start with your story and you start with why you access care or why you need to access care. And it's so eye-opening for them. In fact, they just get blown away by how amazing it is. And they are like, what can I do to help you? So, Simi, it's like almost like the complete opposite. You think you're going in because they are opposing you. Quite honestly, they don't even know what IVF is and why people are using it. So that is why that personal story is so powerful.
Okay. We also have one. Hello, thank you for this incredibly informative event and for what you all do every day. My question is there another hearing coming up to review the Access to Family Building Act that is being led by Senator Duckworth? And will it be brought back to the floor for review?
Well, my understanding is yes. I don't know about a hearing date. There are conversations with the committees of jurisdiction in both the Senate and the House. And I know there is a lot of interest from the leadership in both the Senate and the House to move this bill. And so we're going to be advocating for it on May 14th. We need a lot more lawmakers to hear from their constituents. And we have I think over 140 co-sponsors in the House, and we have quite a few in the Senate. But Simi, my understanding is they will be looking for ways to move this bill, but people need to hear from their constituents. So I don't have the exact date. It's certainly, if we get more information on if it's going to be brought to the floor or if there's a hearing, we'll let people know. But we're super excited about May 14th. because we're going to be talking to Aisha. We're hoping every lawmaker, but we're going to be talking to as many as we possibly can.
Okay, we have one other question. For the legislators that do understand what their decisions are affecting, how do you influence a shift? So I'm assuming like if they understand and they're against it, how do you shift their perspective?
I think that's a great question for Corinne, and what you accomplished in Alabama.
It's a great question. I think oftentimes it's sitting down with those legislators to understand what it is that they are. Sometimes it's like Barb already mentioned, like a just complete just not understanding what goes into IVF. I think sometimes it's getting those lawmakers to hear from the right people, frankly, you know what I mean? And so like being strategic, like who are they going to listen to? If it's not you, is there another group of people that like they would be open to hearing from? And that's okay too. But no, I think I just also want to echo what we've already said a couple of times, like in the work that we did in Montgomery, I can't tell you how many of those women had never advocated before and showed up to the state house and shared their story very bravely, and how much that moved people. And just, I think the other part of this is just how many of us show up matters. Because if we don't have a ton of people showing up, it's not going to seem like it matters to their constituent. So it really does matter that we all show up on May 14th, 15th. I have it on my calendar. And so I would say that too, the magnitude of how many people show up matters.
I want to address one last question. I know we're right at time, but someone asked, is there any chance that science will prevail in establishing a definition of when viable life starts during the development of the embryo and then the fetus? Will science prevail?
Well, I always say that science is like magic, just science is real.
Mhm.
So, there's a lot that needs to happen to change hearts and minds. But all these people on here and what happened in Alabama is an evidence that science can prevail. And it needs to.
Okay, so we are at time, so I'm just going to wrap up, everyone. So we have a QR code on the screen here. Please, if you want to register for Advocacy Day, registration closes April 30th. So please use that QR code and it'll take you right to the registration form. And of course, you can follow Resolve on social media and also ASRM to just be a part of our discussions. And of course, my screen is gonna participate. No, it's not. Of course, it is National Infertility Awareness Week that officially starts today. So please follow the conversation with hashtag Leave Your Mark and find ways that you can participate at infertilityawareness.org. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a great evening.
Thank you.